What is up, guys? Richard Kackis here. Thank you so much for joining me, and today we are going to be taking the brand new Lumina Exotic Hand Cannon through the entire Last Wish raid and ranking its performance on every encounter. If you want to know if a gun is good in PvE, you gotta put it through the ringer, and that's exactly what we're doing. Now, first and foremost, this is a brand new exotic quest reward. If you want to get your own Lumina, check out my guide for how to do so and a bunch of time-saving tips linked up above. Now, let's take a look at this new exotic weapon. It has a couple of unique perks. Firstly, intrinsically, it has noble rounds. Kills with this weapon leave behind remnants. Absorbing a remnant converts your next hip-fired shot into an ally-seeking noble round and partially refills the magazine. So that's pretty complicated and weird, and it's about to get even more weird. The next unique perk is Blessing of the Sky. Using a noble round on an ally heals them and grants both you and them a weapon damage bonus for a short duration. So essentially, here's what's going on. Every time you get a kill with this weapon, where you killed that enemy, where the enemy died, is going to leave behind remnants exactly like the Thorn. If you go near them, run over them, they will slightly move towards you over time if you're close enough. Then you will load a noble round and you can hip fire that noble round at your allies, heal them, and buff them and you with increased damage. So that increased damage thing, of course, is extremely interesting when we're talking about a raid situation. Like, can using the Lumina increase your damage output significantly? Well, there's some things you need to know about this buff before we get started and everything. So it's around a 35% damage increase, at least in PvE, and that's substantial. That's up there with the Well of Radiance. Unfortunately, here's how the buff works. If you get shot with a noble round, or you shoot someone with a noble round, and you have that Blessing of the Sky buff, and then you walk into a well, for example, you gain another buff, an empowered melee, the Blessing of the Sky buff will disappear, at least temporarily. So when you're in the well, you won't have the buff from the Lumina. If you step back outside and there's still time remaining, you will have it. But importantly, this means it doesn't stack with the existing buffs. You can't get the damage bonus from the Well of Radiance and also from the Lumina. It's a little bit unfortunate, but this thing could have been absolutely broken with that fact. So, what's the result of all that? Well, in the first encounter here, we are against Kalli. And finally, we're using a primary again, so killing the thralls when you're holding open the plates, super easy. In fact, it's a perfect way to stock up on noble rounds. You want to be doing that actively when using this weapon. Moving on to the actual damage phase, however, as you can see, it's absolutely pitiful. It's just pitiful. The Lumina doesn't do anything to increase its damage output in this scenario. Now, compared to most other normal hand cannons, you are getting that buff. It is doing way more damage. But normally when we're using the Thorn or whatever, we're standing in a well, which is doing the exact same thing as the Lumina's buff. And the Thorn has intrinsically more damage if you're picking up remnants and so on. So it's going to out DPS stuff like the Lumina. So it just does absolutely no considerable damage output. But there's a whole other factor to this weapon, and that's a utility factor. And that's exactly what you're going to see in the background gameplay. The Lumina did no damage, that's obvious. But what if we use the Lumina not for it actually doing the damage, but to buff our other weapons? Because there lies the utility factor. You can essentially use the Lumina like you would a well. It's a build your own, it's a like dollar store well in some sense. If you don't have a warlock around, this is going to be actually quite useful. So we as a team gassed each other up and killed Riven in no time with stuff like escalation shotguns and the Swarm of the Raven, and I think that's where this gun's true power lies. Now, although I said it didn't stack with other buffs like well, it does stack with debuffs like Tractor Cannon, or what you're going to see us use quite a bit, Melting Point. So, how was the Lumina in this first encounter? Well, the weapon itself kind of trash DPS, but the utility quite useful. And I think overall that equals a 6 out of 10, just above average. Moving on from there, we have the next encounter here against Shero Chi. Does the Lumina fare any better here? Well, as you can see, no, it absolutely doesn't. Like, we weren't even able to use it to DPS her to the limit. In fact, as you can see from the damage numbers, one of us was cheating and using a shotgun and we still didn't get it. So Lumina DPS, trash. But now we're switching to the utility factor. Can we still use the Lumina, especially for killing adds? Like, there's a lot of adds in this encounter, and the Lumina is just a overall pretty crispy hand cannon, great for just one-shot headshotting all the thralls and scions and so on, and the actual healing factor does come up, especially when you're doing the commands. You're like, oh, I'm standing too long, yo, gas me up, gas me up. You hit a teammate and then they're healed. It's actually quite useful. But using that utility and getting that buff, we were able to pretty easily escalation shotgun or Storm of the Raven, Shuro Chi, and reach her damage threshold pretty darn easily. Another great factor of this gun is that you don't have to all stand in a well. You get the buff just by shooting another teammate from across the map, and then if you want to use Swarm of the Raven, you don't want to be too close, you just go back with your buff, and then the rest of the teammates who want to use their shotgun, they go right beside her. Whereas before, you'd either have to put your well further back to use Swarm or right up front to use Escalation Shotgun. So little factors like that can actually swing the advantage over to the Lumina's favor. But overall still, I think, yeah, weapon, trash DPS, utility, actually pretty decent. I'm going to give it here a 7 out of 10. The utility was a little bit more actually coming up in this encounter, especially when you're able to heal your teammates so often. Alright, so moving on from there, next we have Morgeth, aka Sawol Groth. So, for this encounter, of course, at the beginning, you're killing a lot of adds, and the Lumina is, as usual, great there. But, in terms of the actual damage phase, as you can see, we started shooting and realized this thing just does no damage. As with the other encounters, the Lumina is not outputting enough DPS to warrant using at all. Trash DPS. But we all had the buff, so we said, alright, switch to swarms and let's see if we can kill this guy. And that brought up another potential problem with the Lumina, because we all got absolutely decimated by the Taken Seekers. And the reason being is because we're not in a well. We don't have that healing potential, we don't have that survivability per se that a well would provide. Yes, you get healed when you're initially hit with a noble round, but in scenarios like this, when you're just doing straight DPS, it can be very useful to have some extra survivability, and that's what the well provides, and the Lumina doesn't, so that is an actual downside. Now, we ended up doing this again and ignoring the Lumina, just using its buff to use Swarm and other things, and we did incorporate a well for survivability that time, which again kind of cancels out, but anyways, we're able to take Morgeth down pretty easily, but you just gotta make sure to start shooting right away if you are using the Lumina rather than a well. So, overall here, I think it's another pretty solid 6 out of 10. Okay, so moving on from there, the next encounter, the Vault, is very different. There's no boss fights, it's just killing a ton of adds and some tougher adds as well. Here, well, the Lumina's been great at killing adds so far, and it remains great in this encounter. You destroy all of the Taken scions and so on that are coming at you, and there's a lot of those guys, so that means you also have an abundance of noble rounds. Like, it's super easy to have 4 times noble rounds pretty much all the time, and that means you're gassing your teammates up all the time, and in this encounter, it's super useful. Yeah, you're using this weapon as a primary, but then your special can be a great shotgun or fusion rifle, and your heavy can be a rocket launcher, grenade launcher, sword, and being able to just shoot a teammate, give a damage buff to yourself, or get shot by a teammate and get that damage buff, and then just switch to your shotgun for the knights, switch to a grenade launcher, you're gonna take those guys down super easily. You're basically getting the same bonus as if you put down a well of radiance every single time a knight came out. And that's just not practical, unless you're running all 6 warlocks and chaining the crap out of that stuff. but it's actually a lot easier and a lot more practical to just press the trigger when you're hip firing, get a damage buff, and then use it to absolutely crank one of the knights with a shotgun. So damage-wise, it's predictably trash. You don't really want to be using it against the knights or against even the Eyes of Riven. Against the normal adds, it's fine. But the utility, I do believe, comes up a lot more often in this encounter, and it's a lot more practical. So therefore, I think the Lumina gets an 8 out of 10 in the vault. Okay, so moving on from there, we have the final big damage check against Riven. And of course, we're going for that cheese. We want to see if this can kill Riven within a very short time frame. And I think you guys know the answer. I'm not going to leave you in suspense. Yeah, it sucks. It just does not do enough damage. And here specifically, you're kind of bunching up anyways. It's a lot easier to just put down a well than to go to the trouble of using the noble rounds. And from the damage numbers, you can see exactly how bad it is. Ignore the 700,000, that's from a Celestial Golden Gunshot. My teammates just don't listen, I swear. Anyways, in solidarity with this gun, we did decide to melt Riven the normal way with Swarm, but to still use the noble round buff, and we were able to do that pretty darn easily. In any event, against Riven, because the damage is trash and the utility is less than usual, this gets a 4 out of 10. And we have the last raid encounter here with the Queen's Walk. Is the Lumina any good here? Well, normally you're just chaining supers, and here that's exactly what you're doing as well. When you initially come out to that big group of ads, a lot of them are shielded. The Lumina just can't hack it there, so you're using supers. And the Lumina's range kind of does falter, especially when you're trying to shoot some of the phalanxes kind of across the map in this encounter. It's not terrible when you're going through. It's decent at killing ads for sure, but it really didn't stand out. And the noble rounds, again, they were nice, but they weren't really necessary, and they were kind of hard to acquire sometimes because you'd kill an enemy off to the side. Obviously, you didn't want to go out of your way to go get those noble rounds because you need to stick with the runner. So that was kind of a non-bow there. Overall, not super impressed with it in Queen's Rock. It gets another 4 out of 10. Alright, so in conclusion, this is a super unique weapon, but unfortunately, because that buff doesn't stack with other buffs, it's quite a non-bow, and in a lot of scenarios, it's better off just using a well. Now, if your team is made up entirely of non-warlocks for whatever reason, this is your best option to get some reasonable DPS. The utility is there, the actual gun itself isn't too good at damage output. So, overall, I think this gun does get a 6 out of 10. I can't rank it as average or below. The utility factor does make it pretty useful in certain scenarios, but obviously don't rely on it for DPS. Guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed, found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickKackis. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.